So why do you think that guy escaped on the aircraft? How?
No idea.
Oh my God.
Just lucky. I think the way the airplane hit the building, he must have just got thrown out. Just right place, right time. I mean, so lucky. So lucky.
Yeah?
Yeah.
It's different when what about the situation when you crash and then in the middle of nowhere in the ocean, for example?
Yeah.
Is the probability for you to escape it's more than when you crash you hit the building or whatever? Because in the water it's not gonna get that much explosion straight away.
Well, if you look at the Hudson River crash when they landed on the Hudson in New York, I mean, that was a prime example of they did everything perfectly well, landed, and they were just lucky it was in a city, so they got emergency services quite quickly. But if you crashed in the ocean in a similar situation, it would just take them longer to get to you. But you could survive, yeah. You could survive.
Right?
सब सामने हुआ था मेरे खुद को भी
similar in some ways. Let's take a look and I'll explain.
Sorry, say again. Technical reasons, sir, would like to stay closer to Hong Kong. Maybe we will.
Dreamliners don't just fall out of the sky. These aircraft are touted as some of the safest in the world. So when AI-171 crashed within minutes of takeoff, eyebrows were raised, not just in India, but in aviation circles around the globe. Intelligence and aviation authorities aren't taking any chances. They're using what insiders are calling a prevention through elimination strategy. That is essentially ruling out every possible foul play scenario. And some of those scenarios are chilling.
All right, guys, today we're having James Roy in my chair, which we're gonna be talking about what he does, right? So, and then he spent the most of his time on the sky, the reason I say that because he's a pilot. So I'm gonna ask him a little something about this, what he does and everything. All right, stay tuned. James,
Yeah.
what do you say about what happened a few weeks back? Though this was a tragedy, with the airline, the crash.
The India crash.
In the India crash, though. I was why is this kind of things happens? How often did that happen? Is it quite common to do that?
No, it's very rare. It's really rare for it to happen. When I saw that on the news, and then I saw the video footage, my initial thoughts were maybe pilot error.
Right.
Because it was so early after takeoff, and the gear was still down. So when you get to 200 feet, normally you call positive rate and then the gear comes up. But that aircraft still had the gear down. So then I thought maybe they'd misselected the flaps instead of the gear, which is why I just descended and crashed. But, So that was my initial thought. But now I'm hearing they had a double engine failure on takeoff. So they had no power, no thrust.
No power, no?
No, so... and I think the whole flight only lasted 38 seconds.
38 seconds?
Yeah, so from takeoff...
But they didn't went further than, that was
No, so they only went up to 600 feet. So on takeoff, they got to 600 feet and then they started descending and then they crashed. So they only had, the pilots only had 38 seconds.
And then which man, this is it's a little bit freaked me out a lot because you didn't go too high. And then to get this damage, everybody everybody died except for one British guy, right? So, but why? This is because the explosion kind of thing.
Well,
That's
yeah, I mean,
happened, because it had an explosion.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, at takeoff, the aircraft is really heavy with fuel, and that's the dangerous aspect. Is if anything goes wrong, you've got lots of fuel on board. Hence the explosion, and and the fire that happened. But yeah, my initial thoughts were, because the gear was still down, it happened so early on in the flight, that potentially wrong flap setting or some kind of performance issue.
Okay.
Or maybe pilot error, they selected the flap instead of the gear.
Right.
But now I'm hearing on the grapevine that there was some kind of, they call it a FADEC issue, but it's like the control of the engines is done digitally and electronically. And there's been some kind of failure of that. And the aircraft thought it was still on the ground rather than in the air. So it brought the thrust and the power back to idle, and it had no, not enough power to climb, and it just descended. And the poor pilots didn't have so little time to try and rectify it.
But when this kind of like things happen, what is like they will take a little bit more time for them to figure it out. What is like be sure 100% what is the cause of it, and then who is gonna be blamed for that, like if those mechanic or whatever, or
yeah. So the black box and the investigators will quite, I wouldn't say quickly, they'll know in the first probably week or two the general cause, but they'll have to do a lot more analysis and research. And then they can start to, I wouldn't say apportion blame, but try and understand what went wrong, why it happened, and then who's responsible. Sometimes these freak accidents happen, but there's always a cause. But I've not really read the media or any kind of airline articles recently, but what I'm led to believe is that it was a double engine failure on takeoff. And they had very little time, the pilots, to try and resolve it.
It's always like, for me, every like time I'm flying it, and then I never like it, to be honest, I never get worried about like if something happened, because I know that like my mom always go crazy because she was like, oh, you guys stop like traveling that much because I don't know, I'm not sure about the airplane. I said like, come on, airplane is like it's the most like a secure like thing that you can use it. Like a car is way more dangerous, like so many people die every day on a car accident or whatever, and then airplane crash is like it's very rare, right?
No, it is very rare, and they say it's the safest mode of transport. And I mean, I've been flying now 8 years, never had an issue, and I fly obviously more than most.
Right, and then that's always like when I'm like in the connection or whatever, or before I go on board on the plane, I always catch myself wonder like, it's like how long it takes for them, like those mechanics or whatever, those people who works like is responsible for checking in on the airplane to depart again, like they just change and then they're taking off again, right?
So I mean, it depends on the operation, but short haul, when I was on short haul, which is just predominantly flights less than 4 hours.
Okay.
Sometimes 25 minutes, 30 minutes before 25. You fly back.
But what's like the most important things that they checking in to make sure everything?
Well, the pilots or the engineers?
Everything.
Everything. Like so when I was doing short haul as a pilot, when you were walking around the aircraft, you were just assessing everything from how does the aircraft look, tires, not the suspension, but the hydraulics.
Okay.
Looking for any leaks, loose cables, any debris. Like you've got lots of little holes in the aircraft that need to be kept clear. So making sure they're not blocked. You have a general idea of what you're looking for.
Okay.
Let's just imagine you're driving a car.
Right.
And most people don't do this, but you just jump in your car and drive.
Right.
But if you imagine before you drove your car, you check the tires, you checked your lights, your windscreen wipers,
especially like a long drive. Always you're gonna check in everything.
Yeah. So and then you check the oil, and then you might check you've got water for your windscreen washer. So it's that kind of generic check you're doing in between flights.
Right.
Now that I'm doing long haul, when we land somewhere, there's always engineers that come on board and they'll check everything. If oil needs to be topped up, they'll top the oil up. And sometimes they'll have maintenance jobs to do.
Okay.
So quite often they'll try and squeeze in those maintenance jobs if they're quick in between each flight. But there's a maintenance schedule with every aircraft that has to be strictly adhered to, which is why flying's so safe. So the aircraft you fly on get checked constantly. Well, within the UK and definitely Europe, sometimes further afield, in Asia and places like that, they're not as strict. They should be, but they're not as strict.
Right. Okay. And then what about like the crew? Like how do you guys like do it? Like you know each other like before, or
No.
you always have to change every like a flight, change the crew? Like how does it work?
So long haul now, which is what I'm doing. Yeah, I'll turn up, say on a Monday morning, I don't know anyone.
Really?
So yeah, you introduce yourself to the captain and to the crew, and then you just build up a relationship very quickly.
Okay.
And it's the same every time you go flying, so you'll have new crew, don't know
Right.
them. But
Yeah,
we've all
that's
been,
the thing, because I was wondering, like, because when I'm like waiting for my flight in the airport, and then I see the member like the crew, they passing by, and then that's where you guys get to meet each other.
so we meet in the crew room. So
Okay.
when you go to any airport, there'll be a special area for crew to report and check in.
Okay.
And then that's when we meet for the first time,
Right.
introduce ourselves, and then talk about the flight.
Okay.
We do that as pilots separately, and then we'll go and introduce ourselves to the cabin crew,
Okay.
tell them how long the flight is, if there's any issues with weather or the aircraft.
Okay.
But I took a friend recently with me, and he was surprised by how quickly we get to know each other and how friendly everyone is.
All right. That's good.
He's like, oh, you guys seem as if you've known each other for years. But I think we all have, I wouldn't say the same personality, but you have to be outgoing, open, easy to communicate with.
Yeah, I assume, because I mean, you guys, it's a very small team to look after like a lot of
Yeah.
people, right? So
And-
huge responsibility. You guys need to be very connect to attend everybody.
But I think that's the thing as well. We've been trained in such a way that we all know our role and responsibilities,
Okay.
and we all just get on with it. So you're not relying on anyone. You don't have to check on anyone then, effectively. We're all very professional, and you expect that person to do their job without having
Right.
to monitor, review. And we've all been trained to the same high standards that
Do you had any situation where you had a problem with like one of those member, like I don't know, any unpleasant like a situation because they wasn't so professional, they didn't listen, you know, they didn't do their job, and then you had to take over like, look,
No,
man.
I mean, there was one incident, this is years ago.
Right.
We were going to Milan,
Okay,
and one of the toilets wasn't working.
okay,
And this is on short haul, so we only had 2 toilets on the aircraft I worked on. So anyway, so we flew to Milan, and everything was fine. Just before landing, the second toilet stopped working. So we landed, got the passengers off, that was all okay. But then we got the engineers on board to try and fix the toilet, and they couldn't fix it. So the only solution was to fly back to London with no toilets.
okay.
And the cabin crew refused to operate.
Really?
Yeah. He deemed it a health and safety hazard because he said people won't be able to use the bathrooms, it's not acceptable. And he just refused. So,
And then what happened?
So we had two
They
op-
had to change like the.
no, we couldn't because we were in Milan.
No, change like, I don't know, the crew. Like, what
No.
happened like if you call in sick, you don't feel well, or one of those
Oh, so if that
members, like-
happens, if that happens in London, which is why I'm on standby. So if that happens in London, you've got standby crew that will come out within 2 hours.
Okay.
So if that happens, you might get delayed by 2 hours or maybe 3 hours because your crew could be at home, called off standby, and they've got 2 hours then to get to the airport.
Oh, okay.
So say you were boarding an aircraft and one of your crew were ill, but also a cabin crew as well, they have airport standby.
Okay.
So
that's good.
With flight crew on long haul, they don't do airport standby. But with cabin crew, they do airport standby. So if somebody was to go ill, within 30 minutes, they'd have a replacement.
That's good.
At the airport, yeah.
Right.
But in terms if you were in Milan and then somebody went ill, depending on the situation, if it was overnight, they could maybe try and fly someone out. Yeah, it just depends on the situation, really. But that particular one in Milan I was talking about, we ended up flying the airplane back to London empty, no passengers,
No passengers.
because he refused to operate.
Okay.
I know.
That sounds weird.
Yeah, well, he was very difficult.
I bet.
And we spoke to the company, but he just refused. He was inherently lazy as well and tried to get out of doing work. So this was his way of not having to do any work.
Okay. Then they had to stay there and then wait for another flight. Yeah. Okay.
But no, I've not really had any difficult cabin crew.
Okay. Did you had like also any situation where you were like in the middle of the flight, or any very dangerous like a situation where you could get all of you like in danger, so you had to?
Nah, nothing.
No.
No, never.
Okay, that's
Never.
good.
Which is what you want to hear, right?
But
No, I've no. I mean, there's always situations with weather and different things, but never that would put anything in jeopardy or danger. No.
Okay.
No.
Never like a fail or like.
No, I was just going to say touch wood. Luckily, no, I've never had
That's good, man.
any
That's good.
failures yet.
That's good. Yeah, for somehow, man, I do trust in the like. I don't feel any unsafety like in terms when I'm flying though.
When I speak to
Because,
most, go on.
I'm scared like of car or whatever, but not in the airplane. It's like flight is good for me.
Yeah, when I speak to most people, the reason I think a lot of people fear flying is because they're not in control, and they think that because they're so high up in the sky that if something goes wrong, it's going to be catastrophic.
Right.
But, you know, if you're at 30,000 feet and you lose both engines, the aircraft becomes a big glider. You can still fly. And the good thing about being that high up, you've got time to try and correct it and solve the problem. So,
Okay. How long would it take like to properly like how much time are we talking about like?
I mean, if it was catastrophic, and I don't know, I mean, maybe between 5 and 10 minutes.
5-10 minutes is enough.
So you'd have time to try and resolve it.
Okay. How long have you been doing this for, man? Long time?
Almost 8 years now. Well, 8 years of
8 years.
professional flying, being getting paid for it. But I
Right.
qualified in 2009.
Okay.
So what's that? 16 years ago? Yeah.
Right. Hey man, how you doing, right? Good.
So yeah, I qualified 16 years ago.